Paris, May 1944. A cramped cell in Fresnes Prison. Canadian SOE agent Frank Pickersgill has been held here for nearly a year. Tortured, interrogated, starved. The Germans want radio codes, safe house locations, names of other resistance fighters. Information that could destroy entire networks across occupied France. They've taken everything. His wireless set, his weapons, his false papers, everything except his will to survive. He spots it. A wine bottle left carelessly near the cell door. He shatters it against the wall, uses the jagged glass to slash at a guard's throat, jumps from a second-story window, breaks his arm on impact. SS soldiers gun him down in the street before he makes it 50 meters. He survives. Barely. But the escape attempt fails. This is the brutal reality Britain's Special Operations Executive faced by 1941. Once an agent was captured, they had nothing. No tools, no weapons, no hope, unless they had been given something the Germans couldn't find. Something so small, so perfectly concealed, that it could survive even the most methodical search. This is the story of Britain's smallest weapon of the Second World War, a blade measuring barely 2 inches, a knife that weighed less than an ounce, a weapon designed not to win fights, but to create one explosive moment of chaos when every other option had failed. By 1941, Britain was waging a shadow war across Nazi-occupied Europe. The Special Operations Executive, created in July 1940 under Winston Churchill's famous directive to set Europe ablaze, had become one of the war's most audacious organizations. SOE agents had numerous covert weapons at their disposal, operating in France, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and beyond. They carried Welrod-suppressed pistols, plastic explosives disguised as coal lumps, wireless radios small enough to hide in suitcases, time pencil fuses that could be set for hours or days. Britain had equipped these operatives with some of the most ingenious weaponry ever devised, but there was a catastrophic vulnerability in the system. The moment an agent was captured, all that equipment disappeared. The Germans weren't amateurs at this. The Sicherheitsdienst, the Geheime Staatspolizei, the entire apparatus of Nazi security forces had refined prisoner searching into an art form. They stripped clothing. They examined every seam, every button, every watch strap. They checked shoes, belts, coat linings. They found hidden compasses, concealed maps, fake documents stitched into clothing. They found everything. And then the interrogations began. Avenue Foch in Paris, the elegant street that had become SD headquarters, Prince Albrechtstrasse in Berlin, where the Gestapo's main offices stood, regional security headquarters scattered across every occupied country. These places had one purpose: extract information that could unravel resistance networks. The Germans used systematic torture, sleep deprivation that could last for days, beatings with rubber truncheons, electric shocks, kicks to the genitals. Fellow captive Yeo Thomas reported matter-of-factly after the war about the treatment. Pick and Mac were given the usual beating up: rubber truncheons, electric shocks, kicks in the genitals. Some agents broke. Some died before breaking, but almost none escaped, because an unarmed prisoner, handcuffed in a cell deep inside enemy headquarters, surrounded by armed guards, locked doors, and dozens of enemy soldiers, has no realistic options. SOE needed to change that equation. They needed to give their agents one final tool, a weapon that could not be confiscated because it could not be found. A weapon accessible even when restrained. A weapon small enough to be invisible, yet lethal enough to create a single desperate chance at freedom. They turned to 2 men who had spent decades perfecting the art of killing at close range, according to Colonel L.J.C. Wood, who was the commanding officer of Station 12, Aston House, the top-secret SOE research and training establishment. The lapel, or thumb dagger, was designed by the legendary William E. Fairbairn and fellow close combat instructor Eric Sykes. who arrived at this secret facility in Hertfordshire in late 1940. Fairbairn's background reads like fiction. During his service with the International Police in Shanghai, Fairbairn reportedly engaged in hundreds of street fights in the course of his duties over a 20-year career, where he organized and headed a special anti-riot squad. His body told the story of that experience. Arms, legs, torso, even the palms of his hands were covered with knife scars from those encounters. He had studied jujutsu, boxing, Chinese martial arts. He synthesized them all into something new, a system designed purely for killing, not sport, not self-defense. Killing. During World War II, Fairbairn was recruited by the British Secret Service as an army officer, where he was given the nickname Dangerous Don. Together with fellow close combat instructor Eric Sykes, Fairbairn was commissioned on the General List in 1941. Eric Sykes had worked alongside Fairbairn in Shanghai, training the sniper unit. Together, they had already created the Fairbairn-Sykes fighting knife, the 7-inch commando dagger that would become the most iconic blade of the war. Over the course of the conflict, approximately 2 million would be manufactured. But the fighting knife, for all its lethality, had a fatal flaw for captured agents. It was too large. 7 inches of steel cannot hide from a thorough search. Guards would find it in a boot, strapped to a leg, concealed in clothing. So at Station 12, tucked away in the Hertfordshire countryside, Fairbairn and Sykes went radically smaller. The knife was known as the thumb knife due to the method of holding it between thumb and fingers. An alternative name was lapel knife, as it was anticipated that the knife could be conveniently concealed by stitching its sheath to the underside of the lapels of the agent's coat or jacket. The design was brutal in its simplicity, a blade measuring between 1.5 to 2.5 inches long. Some were double-edged. Others featured a single cutting edge with a sharpened false edge. All were optimized for a single purpose, a fast, deep thrust. No traditional handle, just a narrow metal grip roughly the width of a thumb. Total length under 4 inches. Weight approximately 40 grams, lighter than a modern mobile phone, smaller than a pen. But the true genius lay in the sheath. Made of thin metal or leather, the sheath featured multiple small holes punched around its edges. These holes served a critical purpose. The original thumb daggers were manufactured by H.G. Long & Co. in Sheffield, and the sheaths were made by local Aston cobbler Arthur Akers. Those holes allowed the entire sheath to be sewn directly into clothing, into the lapel of a jacket, into a shirt collar, into the seam of trousers, into the lining of a coat. The knife didn't just hide in the garment. It became part of the garment itself. Several variants emerged at Station 12. The standard lapel knife measured roughly 3 inches overall. There were also sleeve daggers, hatpin daggers, and many more. The most ingenious was the insole dagger, a curved blade hidden inside the leather insole of an agent's shoe, retrieved by pulling a concealed string. All shared the same matte black finish, designed for covert operations. All were engineered to be invisible during the methodical searches that captured agents faced. Many variants featured a small loop for a lanyard cord that wrapped around the agent's finger, ensuring the blade could not be dropped or knocked away. If you're finding this fascinating, consider subscribing. It costs nothing, helps the channel, and there's much more to discover about British wartime innovation. Now, let's talk about what agents were actually trained to do with these tiny weapons. At SOE training schools scattered across Britain, facilities like WWII in Scotland and Beaulieu in Hampshire, agents were using Station 12 as a center for unarmed combat and pistol training. Fairbairn introduced what became known as his timetable of death. In an effort to define how long it takes for a person wounded by a knife wound to either lose consciousness or die from hypovolemic shock, Fairbairn created his well-known timetable of death. It was a diagram of the human body showing major arteries, their depth beneath the skin, and estimated times for a victim to lose consciousness once severed. The carotid artery in the neck, running just beneath the skin. 5 seconds to unconsciousness, 12 seconds to death. The subclavian artery beneath the collarbone, 2 seconds to unconsciousness, 3.5 to death. The femoral artery in the thigh, the brachial artery in the upper arm. Students memorized these targets. They practiced the drawing motion until it became instinct. The grip involved wrapping the lanyard loop around the index finger while pinching the weapon between thumb and forefinger. This prevented the blade from being knocked away during a struggle. "Lightning fast," instructors demanded. "Your life depends on being faster than the guard reaching for his pistol." Students practiced on dummies, on sandbags, on sides of beef. The motion had to become automatic. Here's what modern analysis reveals about those numbers. They were wildly optimistic. In 2004, Christopher Gross, a law enforcement officer and defensive tactics instructor in Littleton, Colorado, questioned the accuracy of Fairbairn's timetable and decided to try to validate it with modern medical data. His research demonstrated that the times Fairbairn cited were significantly shorter than reality. Rex Applegate, a Maine protege of Fairbairn's, admitted at a knife show in the summer of 1987 that the timetable of death was not an accurate chart. Its primary goal was to give young commandos the added confidence needed going into guerrilla warfare. That was the point. Young agents facing deployment into occupied territory needed to believe they had a chance. They needed confidence that even when everything else was stripped away, they still possessed one final option. The psychological value of that belief was worth more than perfect medical accuracy. The use case for the lapel knife was grimly specific. An agent during interrogation, hands cuffed but retaining some range of movement. A guard standing close, weapon holstered, attention divided. The agent reaches slowly toward their collar, as if adjusting clothing or wiping sweat. The guard suspects nothing because there's nothing to see. The fabric looks completely normal. The blade comes free with practiced motion. One strike to the throat, to the hand reaching for a weapon. To the vulnerable arteries, Fairbairn's training had burned into memory, not a guaranteed escape. Not a Hollywood fight scene where the hero dispatches 6 guards and walks out the front door. A momentary disruption, seconds of chaos. Time to grab a weapon from a falling guard. Time to break restraints. Time to reach a door. In a building crawling with enemies, surrounded by armed soldiers, in the heart of occupied territory, that might be all an agent could hope for. The lapel knife represented insurance, the kind you desperately hope never to use. Here is where the story becomes frustratingly incomplete. Despite extensive research through declassified SOE files, agent memoirs, and post-war interrogations of German officers, no verified account exists of a captured agent successfully using a lapel knife against their interrogators in the manner SOE envisioned. The dramatic scene of a spy discreetly drawing a hidden blade and fighting their way to freedom appears to be legend rather than documented fact. What the records do show is that captured agents fought back with whatever they could find. Frank Pickersgill, in May 1944, attempted to escape, attacking his guards with a broken bottle, killing 1 or 2 of them, and jumping out of a second-story window, breaking an arm. A soldier fired at him. He was hit twice by bullets and recaptured. He used an improvised weapon because that's what was available in that moment. The SD chief in Paris, Joseph Kiefer, later enlisted imprisoned SOE agent John Starr to help with radio deception after Pickersgill proved uncooperative. After the war, SOE's Vera Atkins interviewed Kiefer, who named Pickersgill as one of 3 captured SOE agents who successfully resisted all German efforts to obtain information from them. He was later executed at Buchenwald concentration camp on September 14, 1944. This absence of documentation doesn't prove the lapel knife was never used. SOE operated under extraordinary secrecy. Many files were deliberately destroyed after the war. MRD Foote, the official SOE historian, worked under restrictions so severe he couldn't tell his wife what he was researching. Evidence that might confirm operational use may simply have been lost to history. What we can say with certainty, the weapon existed, was issued, and gave agents something no other military force provided: a hidden option, a final card to play. The lapel knife represents something larger than its physical dimensions suggest. When the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, was created in June 1942, they adopted British lapel knife designs wholesale. American agents operating behind enemy lines received the same tiny Sheffield blades. Camp X, which was located on a farm at Ajax, Ontario, Canada, was jointly operated by the British Security Council and the Government of Canada. Ian Fleming was among the operatives trained there. It is believed that Fleming drew on his experience at Camp X when he created James Bond. The Q branch gadgets that would later become fiction were rooted in the very real innovations of SOE's research stations. No comparably documented German program for miniaturized concealed blades has been identified. The Abwehr, the SD, the entire Nazi security apparatus developed different approaches to covert operations. They emphasized false uniforms, recruited locals, signals deception. But they didn't systematically equip their own operatives with sewn-in micro-daggers the way Britain did. That difference reveals something about British thinking. When your agents face capture, torture, and death in enemy territory, you give them every possible advantage, even one that weighs 40 grams and hides in a coat collar. At Station 15, the thatched barn facility responsible for final preparation of agents before deployment, the camouflage section's main role was to equip agents prior to their deployment to France. The station was run by a film director, and his team included stage prop experts from the film industry. Tailors carefully stitched the tiny weapons into continental-style clothing. Every detail mattered. The thread had to match European standards. The fabric had to be correct. German searchers knew British manufacturing techniques. A single English stitch pattern could betray an agent. But the knife, properly concealed, became invisible. Part of the garment. Part of the agent. Today, original SOE lapel knives are exceptionally rare. The Imperial War Museum holds examples in their collection, catalogued alongside explosive rats, disguised coal, and the other ingenious devices that emerged from Britain's secret research stations. Auction houses occasionally offer pieces with varying degrees of verified provenance, though collectors warn that reproductions vastly outnumber genuine wartime examples. Unlike the approximately 2 million Fairbairn Sykes fighting knives whose manufacture was well documented, production records for lapel knives remain incomplete. The weapon designed to be invisible has mostly disappeared from history. But the idea behind it remains, that British engineers could solve problems others considered unsolvable, that even a captured agent, stripped of everything, surrounded by enemies, facing torture and execution, was never truly helpless. In the shadowed rooms of occupied Europe, in the hands of men and women who knew they might never come home, a 2-inch blade sewn into a jacket lapel represented something the Germans could never confiscate. One final option. One hidden chance. The possibility, however slim, of turning the tables on an interrogator and walking out alive. That was the philosophy of SOE. That was British innovation under pressure. That was what happened when a nation fighting for survival decided that no advantage was too small, no weapon too unconventional, if it might save one more agent in the field. The lapel knife may have been Britain's smallest weapon of the Second World War, but it represented something immense: the refusal to accept that any situation was truly hopeless, and the determination to give those in the most desperate circumstances one last tool to fight back. That's the story of the tiny British lapel knife, a weapon you hope never to use, insurance against the worst-case scenario, a final card hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when everything else has failed.